Welcome back to Zero Gravity Live, the Weightless Weekly Tech Talk podcast. It's not weekly. I don't know why I said that. It's monthly. That's the old script. Whatever. We're good. It's the Weightless Weekly monthly Tech Talk podcast.
That's right.
Coming right to you. I'm joined by my bestie, Matt, and we're telling you all about why you need true immutability today. And for those that don't know what that is, we'll get into it. But I don't think Matt and I can do this on our own. What do you think, Matt? Probably requires
No, I don't think
experts.
so, Anthony. You're right. It's a monthly show now. Join us every third Tuesday of the month. Same
That's
time,
right.
Same bat channel. Certainly, if you guys will, just a couple quick housekeeping notes before we bring in our awesome special guests. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. So I'm going to put this ticker up. Please put in the chat where you're tuning in from. We definitely want to see how far the show has legs. How far does it reach? And we want this to be interactive. So we're streaming on LinkedIn, we're streaming on YouTube and X. We're monitoring all of those chat feeds. So if you've got any questions for the panel, please drop those in, and I'm going to be monitoring those so we can ask them live and get you some live answers. So with that said, Anthony, to your point, let's bring on our special guests. Rick, Michael, welcome to the show.
Howdy.
Hey. Now, y'all, we like to play a fun game on this show. It's called What's in Your Office, and we love to force our guests to do this on the fly. Both of y'all have like crazy office backgrounds.
Yes.
I mean, actual office backgrounds. So that's great. What one thing do you want to share with us today? Let's start with Rick.
Well, first of all, you called it a background. Yo, this is real. I would never do this to my house, okay? This is officially a Veeam museum. But the one thing I'm going to share with you is that hidden amongst the swag, there is snark. And I mean, there's some really salty snark, including some snark from, I think it was June of 21 from Michael Cade. He messaged me in Teams saying, I can't wait to get traveling again, mate. It's so exciting. And
just like him.
Yeah, just like I printed it out. I printed out his little Teams message on there. And like I got one from Kirsten. You can actually see it right there, a little white one right there. It's like, I wonder what the cabbage tastes like, because the taco shop next door had a monthly taco with some cabbage. And then the best one is right there, and it is saying it's a checkbox. Are you drunk? Yes or no? But the X is like way out of no. So you keep looking, you'll find some snark up in my space.
I love it. Snark Museum. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's mostly Veeam, but there's a little snark.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to pepper it in there. Yeah. Michael, when we last chatted, I was just floored by some of the things you've got to your left over there. But what are you going to share with us today?
So it would be easy for me to go and pick one of these mechanical keyboards, especially this one here. So I built that one last year. Let me warn everyone, don't get into mechanical keyboards. They cost a fortune. However, the one thing, it is mechanical keyboard-ish. And let's see if it picks up. So this is a Stack Overflow. In fact, they sent it to me. But before AI was cool, Stack Overflow was where everyone went, right, to get their answers to questions. A bit like Googling, but you'd end up Googling to a Stack Overflow. And ultimately, that picture there would take you to Stack Overflow. And then you've got your copy and paste, the Control-C and Control-V. So that's and it is actually a keyboard. You can use it.
I could use that in my dev days for sure, because that was pretty much every operation of every day.
Now we've got ChatGPT and Copilot, and you can just ask them anything, and they're trained on Stack Overflow, so all good.
I was going to say they just have access to that little keyboard you've got there, so it's just shortcutting the process even more. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and thanks for sharing some of the fun things in your office. Like we said in the intro, we're talking all about true immutability, but I think as a baseline, it's important to just, before we put the word true in front of it, let's just talk about immutability. A little quick around the horn. What is everyone's thoughts on the word immutability, and what does it mean to you? I'll start with Matt first.
Yeah, I feel like immutability it's table stakes now, right? Anthony, I feel like when you and I first started at Object First, it was something new that people were adding, and now immutability is absolutely paramount in data security, no matter what you're talking about. And certainly today, when we focus on backups, it's the inability to make changes or delete or modify data until X period has lapsed, which the user gets to control. One thing, though, that I feel like is a common oversight is it has no bearing on the ability to view data or copy data. So things like encryption are also incredibly important. So Rick, what do you think?
Well, I think I actually have a funny story. I was in a customer meeting when the word was relatively new, and we've all been there. There's someone that just has to be the smartest person in the room. They pipe up and say, well, I'm an English major, and I'm not sure that that is even a word, immutable. And I'm like, oh, buckets. That's how this is going to go. All right, so just a side note. But what I think it is just really this undeniable, this absolute copy of data. And I use the word copy intentionally because I don't want to live in a singular instance world, 321 and more. Brunel, Florida, 32110, represent. Oh, sorry, wrong show. But anyways, my thought here is just this absolute kind of undeniable instance copy of data, because we all have this nothing but evidence that there are bad things that can happen to good data. And that is the single most effective media to not be in that situation.
Michael, what do you think?
So it was interesting because Matt said table stakes, and I went to 2 meetings last week, and they're not, they might know about immutability and storing their data and leveraging that, but they're not doing it. So so it feels like I'm repeating that story. And equally, you get into it and they're like, well, we don't know the air gap solution. We're not on the internet. We've got blah, blah, blah. They're storing it in an S3 location on-prem in their data center. And then you have to kind of remind people that, look, this isn't there just for ransomware and big, bad malicious stuff. This is there for malicious insider threats, accidental deletion, gaps in policy. All of that sort of thing is still a fail, like another tick in the box when it comes to protecting that data, right? It doesn't have to just be the scary frontline news of ransomware attacks.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is all three of you took it to a very specific point in regards to your own experience with immutability. I think what folks are really struggling with today, and this is my personal opinion, is that immutability can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different folks. And there are textbook definitions. You can talk about worm, write once, read many, and kind of lay it out very factually. You must be able to do X over a certain amount of time with no change. But I think it boils down to, we all understand what immutability is, but how is it applied practically and specifically in backup scenarios to make it usable? I think that's where folks are struggling. So, at Object First, we've come up with this concept, which is called true immutability, which basically just seeks to do exactly that. It's take everything you've talked about and put it into a very understandable sort of factual order. I mean, it's factual, but it's also, it's our opinion, but we think it's a pretty good opinion. So, in our mind, true immutability actually starts with the mindset of assume breach, right? And assume breach mindset basically says, regardless of security, regardless of infrastructure, regardless of least privilege access, anything you can put in place, you will be breached. It is not a matter of if, but when. And you must consider that when it comes to your backup storage environments, right? And we've even seen this with some of our own customers where they have been able to survive specifically very fierce and malicious ransomware attacks because they were in an assume breach mindset. They knew that this kind of thing would happen. So they took the steps to proactively prepare against it by reducing the amount of spread they could have with things like least privilege, removing an administrator's just God power and giving them very specific slices of ownership using things like role-based access controls. But we think it starts there. And again, I'm curious, what do y'all think about the assume breach mindset, and how has that played into some of the conversations y'all have had with your customers? We'll start with Rick this time.
Well, I think assume breach really walks a good alignment with all the security frameworks, ZTDR and more. But I think it also applies to fire, flood, and blood, scenarios. And again, I love this word. And this actually goes to at least a Veeam conversation that we've been doing forever. Michael's a champion of it, the data portability. And I think what's really the most overlooked scenario, whether it's a cyber incident or fire, flood, and blood, is what I call absolute portability. And that works right into this joint solution where we can just have data in a bucket and we can drive absolute recovery. And when you think about assuming breach, okay, I'm going to take these backups and I myself am going to go red team it and try to destroy it. Guess what? I can't, right? So when you like go one step further and try to red team some of your scenarios, you're good. And I think that is the difference. That's the true immutability. That's the absolute portability is the word I like to use. Mm-hmm. And I think it really comes down to, okay, you've built it, now try to break it. That is the test. You know where all the bodies are buried, you know, as the architect, as the, you know, designer of what an organization is implemented. Once you get to that level, you know, that's where it's at. That's that like highly, you know, functioning, highly resilient, highly competent IT shop. And that is kind of what I want to challenge organizations to think. And I don't know if we're going to talk about encryption, but we'll get to that. Good encryption.
We will.
Intentional.
We will.
Intentional. Yeah. Sorry, right. The one we liked. But, you know, but that's kind of my thing. It's just this absolute recoverability aspect, you know. It's really a big deal.
I do have to, you know, you just gave George R.R. Martin the name for his next book, Firefly. That's great.
That's a John Nicholson. I stole it from him. So, anyways.
Credit where it's due. All right. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think taking away that choice, like the customer scenario, and that's just top of mind for me because I was speaking to them last week and they were like, oh no, we haven't got round to it. We haven't implemented it. So to have like a default option. So when I buy a car, I know it's got 4 wheels on it. It's just going to go down the road. That's kind of, I don't want to have to choose anything about, I just need it to work. And then if we go back to like the S3 protocol in general, like very much the de facto API, the protocol that's used for that, why can't this be, I don't know why, because obviously didn't think of things like control from day one, but amazingly in a lot of S3 compatible storage, the default is we're not going to set up object lock. We're not going to set up version control. If you take away that, you've got to untick it to say no, rather than I've got a ticket to say yes. Like those little mindset choices can be made for the end user. And this is where actually having that conversation last week was, this doesn't have to be a huge implementation task. Like it's not an architectural, you're already sending your backups to an S3 compatible storage. You just have to just tick the box. And then from evermore, that will be, or for as long as you need it, it's going to be that ransomware resilient, or actually I messed up and said ransomware resistant as another say. But
that's good,
yeah,
though. I like that.
There you go. Like, otherwise, you're just copying and pasting what everyone else is saying, right? So yeah,
yeah.
But yeah, I think if you just take the choice out of people's hands, then it's done. It's already implemented.
Couldn't agree more. And Matt, what about you? Assume breach.
Yeah, I look at this like, you know, Anthony, you and I were talking about this the other day, and maybe you can appreciate this, guys, but from an analogy perspective, you think about perimeter security as the old school castle with the moat around it, right? And you had all these mechanisms to prevent people from getting into the castle. But if they were able to gain entry into that huge drawbridge door, they could go to any room in the castle. When I look at this assume breach mentality, I think, okay, let's just open up all the doors. Let's drain the moat. Let's let them in. How can we still stay protected? So the theory there is, rather than having the old school janitor key ring with all the different keys to go to all the different doors, they go right in, but it's a combination lock. So then what do you do? Right? So you've assumed that they're already going to breach perimeter security. You're not even worried about that anymore. So what happens when they actually get in front of the box? What can they then do if they don't have any keys and there's not even a key slot? So to me, that's kind of where my head goes in analogy land for this type of, you know, thought.
Couldn't agree more. You know, one of the things we often talk about with our customers is assume all secrets are known, which is just, it's a great way to kind of put this in the back of your mind is, what if everyone had your password, your username, every way to get in? But, you know, I think there's one thing that Veeam has actually done really well, and we're following in your footsteps now, which is the 4 eyes security principle, right?
Yep.
And like, I think that is one of the strongest ways to deal with an assume breach mindset, because so often bad actors will try to go through support to make changes. And y'all have specifically taken this upon yourselves to use this 4 eyes security approach to mitigate some of these things. And for those that don't know, I'll let you take the first crack, Rick. What is 4 eyes security?
Well, 4 eyes or multi-person authorization is an ultra resilient technique, right? So I look at some data types are ultra resilient, like a couple of our joint service providers, a couple hardware providers have copies of data that requires 2 humans to expose or manipulate it, right? And then in the Veeam backup and replication implementation, things like deleting backups on disk requires authorization. Ask Kirsten how many times I ask her to do that in the lab, but it's a good best practice. So 4 eyes is a really good way to increase, like, honestly, I'm not an insurance actuariist or anything like that, but if you think about the mathematical layers of difficulty, that's a big one. Immutability is a table stake one, but a 4 eyes model as well. Incredible, just probability math of keeping this data safe to then again walk into those absolute recovery scenarios, right? So I think 4 eyes is a long way. It may be another way to kind of make it easy for some people to think of. It's like the 2-person MFA, really, in a way that rhymes. Yeah. We do that on Tuesday, but the thought here is 4 eyes is, really, really a powerful technique, but pirates are not supported because those are only 3.
Oh my gosh. I hate that I got it so quickly. Like, if it took me a second, oh, I'm so sorry.
One time on the show, you'll never have me back. I know. It's fine.
All right.
Real.
That was good.
That's awesome.
Just now I'm gone. I'm gone, y'all. All right. So, we talked about assume breach. We understand the threat and the principles here. Step 2 is, how do we segment our backup software from our backup storage? And Rick, you've already let us in with the Brunel, Florida zip code 32110. I think that is a crucial part to all of this. But I think where people get tripped up on this a lot of times is the 3, right? Like, I hear so many people say, I actually need 3 copies of my backup data. Well, it's 3, including production. But the 2 copies that need to be managed, the actual copies of the production data, we're suggesting they should not be within the same environment, the same infrastructure, and they both should be immutable. Michael, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I think I can follow that same analogy as well, right? And I think where things have changed, like, I remember joining Veeam 10 years ago, and that 3-2-1 rule was literally the storyline, and the history of that is really interesting. Like, that wasn't Veeam that made that up. That was a photographer that said about, well, you've got your different copies of that data, right? Anyway, go and look that up. I'm not going to cite everything to that, but yeah, exactly. I think, and it used to, obviously this was before the immutable story, and you 3 copies on 2 different media types, and then one of them being offsite, and then we've added, or the industry has added, all of those different other caveats that we need to have, whether they're verified, like in terms of using sure backup and making sure that they're good, or are they immutable, and are they offsite, and where do I keep my 714 30-day type retention, and should that be immutable on-prem, and then do I offload that to a cheaper, deeper storage for longer term retention? So I think to simplify that massively is, 1 copy is your production data, whatever that platform may be. And I guess from our perspective, that could be a Kubernetes cluster and PVCs, an application that is made up of that. It could be an RDS instance in Amazon. It could be a virtual machine. It could be a physical machine. It could be a database. It could be unstructured data, blah, 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 right? Ultimately, though, that 3-2-1 rule should stick over all of that. It should be, right, you've got your production system. Then you're going to consider where you have the 2 copies. And that might be, one of those copies might be a 714 30-day type retention, as close to production as possible, should still be immutable. just really fast for recovery. You might also add a little dot in there for snapshots for really fast recovery. And then you're going to offload to a secondary location offsite, also air gapped and immutable as well. And that just gets away. That's how I'd talk about the 3-2-1. I know Rick loves to add in the zip code on top, and there's a story there as well. But yeah, that's kind of where I'd summarize that.
Rick, what about you? What would you add?
Well,
if you wanted to add the full zip code.
I think I'm going to go north with it. I'm going to go to Daytona Beach, because they're 3-2-1-2-0, and that second 2 is
I'm legally dead, y'all.
That second 2 is 2 of those copies being ultra resilient, immutable. Again, the layers, the math, that is where it's at. One of our joint friends, one of the Vanguards, he's a 4-copy type of guy. That's okay. But here's the thing. When you get into this multiple copy, again, the layers, the resiliency, Jason Buffington on our team likes to say, what you do left of the bang 100% predicates what you do to the right of the bang. And having these several copies, so 3-2-1-2-0, Daytona Beach, good time. You can have both of those copies ultra resilient, immutables, the easiest, most kind of popular way to do it today. But you also can do things like analytics with that. You can put that data to work for business reasons analytics. You also could do deep scanning. You also could do recovery verification, those things we should be doing anyways, right? So when we have this world of multiple copies, that's where I want to go with it. And the best part is you mentioned storage, or was it Zill mentioned the storage snapshots? The beautiful thing about the 3-2-1 rule and all of its associated variants is that it doesn't prescribe any specific hardware or configuration, yet it's ready to address nearly any failure scenario. That's why I kind of don't ever go too far away from fire, flood, and blood, because, the ransomware will get you the headlines, get you the budget. Right. I hate to say it, but what if those other things happened, right? So you have to be duly prepared. And then when you can throw on other business benefits, like using these environments for analytics, using these environments for recovery verification, deep scanning, hey, now we can talk about other benefits unlocked, right? So I think that, I should have been targeting Daytona. Brunel's nice, but I like Daytona better.
Daytona is a little bit, as a Floridian, Daytona is just a little bit nicer.
Yeah, I think that's closer to where you're at. You might be pure
it
central.
Is.
Oh, okay.
It is. It is closer. Daytona is the vacation spot of the Central Floridian. So yeah, I favor it. Matt, I'm curious with your experience at Object First when it comes to 3-2-1-1-0 specifically, and how we talk about least privilege and immutability. What's been your big takeaway?
I'm also dying over here, Anthony. It's like Rick is just coming up with new trademark slogans.
Never,
every single time.
5 minutes before, I'm like, what are we going to do? What are we talking about? So all 4 days.
Hey, you know what? You have a zip code, then you have to move, and then you get a new zip code. I mean, times change, right?
That's right.
I feel like for me, one of the big things that I've been talking about from day one, and this was in Veeam land and also in Object First land, when we look at this Veeam zip code, the 0 to me is really, really important because, we all talk about testing and verify recoverability and whether or not you're doing it with Sure Backup or some other manual, check and balance process. What good are all these copies if you've never actually ensured they're recoverable to begin with, right? So you can encrypt them, you can make them immutable, you could send them to 12 clouds. It doesn't matter if you've never actually tested the recovery process. What actually happens when the rubber has to meet the road. I feel like that is a paramount part, an integral step that regardless of where we're living and what zip code, that 0, I feel like has to be the tail end of the zip code, right? To me, that's one of the biggest pieces here.
The best way to explain the 0, no surprises. When you go to recover, you got it. PII isn't where it's supposed to be. You've scanned it clean. It's more than just recoverability. Yeah. So I think when you layer on all those other no surprises, what could you be surprised about? There's plenty, right? So that's my angle with the 0.
I think.
And, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to double down on that zero, because that zero for us used to be just, let's verify that the backup's going to spin up. We'll test against the VM, the app, and the OS, and just rolls off my tongue because I've said it that many times. But actually, now we're going to run a scan against your latest virus definitions, and we're going to ensure that there isn't anything lurking in there that is bad. And just because you might take the backup, then you might do that automation of verifying that. But you could also do that in a week's time or a month's time against the even more latest definitions. So that zero becomes, actually, there's a bullet point list underneath as actually what are you ensuring? You're ensuring that you can verify, like, the recovery is there because you've actually physically spun that backup up. But equally, you've made sure that there's zero vulnerabilities and malicious files in there. You can do other things. We can inject things into that backup and see what that plays like. There's, to Rick's point, I really like the zero surprises like that. There is quite an extensible range of things that can happen at that point. Some of which marketing have got hold of, but there's a hell of a lot of art of the possible as well that you can bolt on top of that as well.
Yep. Absolutely right. And I'm going to add one more zero. We got to figure out how to fit this into the zip code, but zero trust, because you could do all of this. And if you don't have zero trust in the spread across from backup manager to backup storage to offsite cloud, if you're not implementing zero trust, least privilege access, following the Z2DR playbook, it's all for nothing, because you can easily come in and just governance mode your way out of most of these situations. So you got to have zero trust.
We might as well make it a phone number at this point, dude.
We got area codes to worry about now.
Oh, man.
So let's get into our last piece, right? We hit on this just a little bit, but the idea of S3 object storage, it's a newer technology in the storage stack, but we've seen Veeam. It's come out with your direct to object storage, smart object storage API, object first, it's in the name, right? Like, we know the value of what object storage can bring to a backup environment, but let's go through it and just make sure we hit those highlights so everyone knows why we're going down this path when it comes to immutability. And I'll start with you this time, Matt.
Yeah, I look at object storage as really being the industry standard proven immutable backup target tech, right? And it's not something that one vendor like us or another competitor created. This is like built by Amazon, third-party tested, validated. Object lock is part of it, right? We're not trying to create our own homegrown solution. And when I look at it, the whole externally validated piece to me is probably the most important. It's not trust us, your data's secure, right? It's, hey, we're using this industry standard proven technology with object lock. And further, Veeam is the data management platform, right? The Veeam side of it is what's controlling how long the data is actually immutable. So we put that back in the hands of the Veeam admin to fully control and fully have visibility on all their immutable backups. So that's one of the big things for me.
It's a really good point, Matt. Rick, what do you think?
Well, I think that the important part of how you practically lay it down is when you think about what the industry changed by just the definition of the S3 standard. I think, honestly, it's a fantastic gift that Amazon has done, is make it more of a S3 compatible. It's paved the way for your solution and others. I don't even think it's licensed. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not.
Software company. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyways, where I'm going with that is it proves a couple of things. It proves scale, because I mean, blocks and LUNs are fun, but when you run out, you're done. Okay.
Right.
So,
another rhyme. My God.
sorry, guys. I just made that up.
Matt, cue up the ticker. Get it in there.
My thought here is you just don't have that. I mean, there's limits with object storage. In fact, that another customer meeting had a math major. I was like, yeah, in the cloud, it's practically unlimited. They didn't like that because there is no such thing as infinite capacity, but it's effectively more than what they would ever have needed, right? So it proves a scale. thing, and there's just a simplicity. It inherently spreads across, like laser beams and stuff. So it's really cool in that regard. So I think that is, first of all, very different, but proven by, that cloud company in Seattle. Yep, it is the Rictionary, Randy Lee. That's right. But the thought here is that it's one of those things that just really proves the scale, because honestly, we're just not in the business anymore. If I think of our IT folks, people who use our products, we don't really need to be like as granular in terms of capacity planning is definitely a discipline, but it's just a shed load easier in this world, right? So my angle here is just really doubling down on the scale.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting avenue to go down. And Michael, I'm curious with your experience with object storage and S3 in general. What are some of the big takeaways for you and why it's important for immutability?
So I think for me, especially the last 3 or 4 years where I've been focused around cloud and cloud native, is that they're just other platforms, right? So VMware's a platform, Hyper-V's a platform, any other virtualization hypervisor, Kubernetes, cloud, PaaS, they're just platforms that we play with, right? That ultimately is going to have some sort of data, important stuff on there. And they need protecting. And the most interesting thing was from a custom perspective, 3-4 years ago when we first rolled them into Veeam, they only could back up to S3. They could only back up to object storage. There was no NFS. There was nothing else. It was just object storage. And that then made you think, so it doesn't matter. As we see this explosion of data being everywhere but just the data center, and now we've got little pockets of SaaS and PaaS and IaaS and Kubernetes here, there, and everywhere. Actually, that data still needs protecting, regardless of what it is. Like a database in Kubernetes, Postgres in Kubernetes looks exactly the same as Postgres on a VM or Postgres in RDS, but it still needs protecting, right? It's still probably the most important database in the business, holding all of the mission critical information. And if someone says it's not, then why do you even have it? Why are you spending all the money on it? So, and the fact that any platform has the ability, Veeam has this capability about being able to send those backups to that S3 location, be able to provide that immutability, be able to provide the verified recoverability of that, even though on some platforms it's a little bit more manual or extensible to that degree. But I think that's what is important, is that customers that are still going over that, how can I send this to a dedupe device? How do I send that to a JBOD, just a bunch of disks? You're going to get so much more from an object storage location. That scale is where I was going to pick up from where Rick was talking about that.
And you mentioned the send, Michael, which I think it's such an important part of this process, right? Because when we talk about immutability, the mind goes to, it's a location, it's a target, it's storage. But the sending, the transferring, and the receiving is just as equally important. If you're not encrypting data before you send it, I mean, you are now exposing data to man-in-the-middle type attacks, right? And if the data lands in a zone that is not immutable by default, right? If it has some kind of cache buffer landing zone that doesn't have that data in a protected state, it's vulnerable for manipulation there as well. So when we talk about immutability, the mind immediately goes to storage, but it is truly, it's a bunch of parts that have to work together and sort of a flawless communications chain to ensure that data remains protected from the moment it enters the backup data mover to the moment it lands in its final landing place of that immutable backup storage.
On that encryption, Anthony, I've got to let Rick's got another saying, and I can't let this.
Let's hear it, Rick.
I know, I'm jumping out of my chair. All right, so I like to say, encrypt your data in the cloud, or someone else will do it for you. Okay,
that's good. That's good.
But my thought is, work backwards on that. I grew up encrypting tapes, thinking they'd fall off a truck, and then we'd be in trouble. Okay, everyone can kind of, it's old enough, bald enough, gray enough, can relate to that. Now, if we think about where we are today, the threats, and honestly, that type of thing, like just an accident data leak, that is very low today, really. But if I'm a threat actor, you know, I'm going to go for the backups, and, you know, we have data indicating that, meaning I'll take them home and play with them later. So they better dang be encrypted. You know, my thought is, because it's a massive opportunity, and that's just a read. Forget trying to destroy. So my thought is, if threat actor, again, thinking they're going to be in the mix, get in the business of protecting, encrypting that data wherever it goes. And my advice is even going to first copy of backup data to encrypt that. And the thought here is that the juice is worth the squeeze, meaning you'll lose some storage efficiency, but that again, layer of resiliency is worth it. Sorry.
Couldn't agree more. It's a good saying too.
That's the encryption part, because a lot of people overlook that. You know, they're so focused on immutability and ransomware, right? Ransomware is certainly the hot topic right now, but what about all the other threats? And you guys both mentioned some of those earlier. It's like, it's not like all the other threats cease to exist because ransomware is now taking the podium, right? There's a lot more other things where encryption is needed to maintain, you know, brand integrity and things of avoiding leaks, social security numbers, bank account records, all the things that could be leaked.
I have to shout out. Oh, go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
No, you go, Anthony. I've got something to add to that as well.
We'll come right back to it. So I do want to shout out one of our commenters in the audience. The actual explanation for S3 and the origination of S3. Gabriel tells us that Amazon standardized cloud object storage. However, the original protocol was with Seagate IBM. So thank you for that. It's always good to get down to the facts in real time here. What were you going to say, Michael?
Yeah, so I was going to go on to the encryption, and if you to your point, Matt, as well about, or I think Rick touched on Buffington talking about left and right of bang and the prevention, and seeing more and more customers, they'll absolutely encrypt the mission critical database and make sure that if anything's taken out of that, so it just, that same mindset needs to trigger through to the backups, if not even more important. On that, like we've done a lot of work about that encryption and those keys and management servers. So being able to integrate into KMS type systems so that you can rotate the keys, manage the keys. So you're not just relying on a password that maybe it was once upon a time. You're now going to the enterprise scale KMS type systems again over multiple platforms, so that you've got that security of that. And then on top of that, being able to integrate into even more to the left of the prevention. Like, when do we see smoke signals that tell us, well, that doesn't look quite right on the network, or that doesn't look quite right on CPU, and anomalies that way. So I think they all play a huge part in that preparedness of ransomware. But equally, as Rick said, or Anthony might have said, like, we talk about ransomware literally daily because it's the biggest insurance policy that we need. But actually, accidental deletion, if you look at analyst reports, it's still accidents happen, misconfigurations happen more than ransomware attacks. So you're also protecting against that, as well as insider threats and malicious activity. So I think they're all like intertwined and like all part of the same story.
You know, you bring up an important point. We had a question from the audience that came in from Massimiliano. I'm assuming that's how you say your name. As a partial Italian, I feel terrible for butchering it. They ask specifically when it comes to properly designed, segmented VHR from a technical standpoint, and the comment gets cut off here, but they say, what is the difference between an UTB versus a VHR in those situations? And I'll take the first crack, and I want to hear what each of you have to say. UTB versus VHR is not so much a verse as it is understanding the appropriate sort of utilization for these things, right? VHR is something that you get to set up and manage yourself. When you need that hands-on ownership for your device, it is a great technology for that. And the fact that it is included with Veeam deployments makes it a fantastic option for that initial first touch. UTB was designed to be secure by default, secure by design, no security expertise required. And yes, I'm just parroting the marketing message that we've created here, but like that stands true at the technical level as well. You don't have to manage our box at the end of the day. You're paying for something that has been secured to a level that you should never have to understand how it is secured. We will tell you how it is, but you shouldn't have to understand it to know that it is secured. That's why we go off and do third-party testing with groups like NCC every year and publish the report for all to see. We want to make sure that it's not just a trust us, it's a trust them who are the experts. We've done all the work on our end. But it's a matter of, do you want to take that work on for yourself? Do you want to be responsible? Like Michael was saying, accidents happen. If you don't keep these things up to date, if you don't manage your setup when it comes to firmware, hardware, software, operating system, things get through. And how much of that are you willing to carry for yourself? But I'm curious, Rick, what's your take on that?
So, Mas, that's a really good question. And I agree with everything Anthony said. I'll give you an additional and differing perspective. I think one of the biggest advantages of an UTB is actually just the management UI, because you don't really get something like that with a VHR. You do get Veeam 1, but it also can look at object storage repositories, including the UTB. But really, if you have an UTB, you get both of those. You have really good views of capacity and nodes and stuff like that. One of the harder challenges of the VHR is underlying hardware management, but with an appliance, you hedge that off a little bit. There's also a notion of scale. Correct me if I'm wrong, you can add nodes later. Can you do that with UTB?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yep. Mix and match for as long as you like.
VHRs sit in the world of block and disk. Now we have the scale up backup repository, so we have a way to handle it that way as well. But I'd say there's a small management advantage to an UTB. But I like to say, I'll say this all the time. The VHR is a great way to have an additional immutable copy with no Veeam cost, right? But there's also an overhead. Like our highest performing environments are industry standard servers with a lot of dense drives. But that's just a lot of overhead in managing that. In the VHR, you can achieve that, but you don't have the same management capabilities that, I hate to use the word appliance, brings to you, but you have a unique advantage that is laser focused on the serving of those backups, right? So I'd say there's a small management advantage. I'd also say that when you look at individual, speeds and feeds and drives, I don't know if that, that gets varied. It depends. But I will say that working backwards in the supply chain of the object first, Eric Schott, Chief Product Officer there, is one of the most brilliant people I've ever personally met, and he is in charge of that stuff. And then Alexei Vashilev as well, made the first Veeam product ever. So when you say it's specifically designed for Veeam, they mean it. Okay, so I'd say there's an advantage there, and that's kind of weird coming from me, but it's pros and cons. Ultimately, it depends. But I'd add that manageability is a kind of a long game benefit.
Yeah, great stuff, Rick. So one of the quick comments I wanted to throw up here, I can relate to this, is kind of the theme of what we've been talking about, right? Yeah, we're just talking about ransomware is not the only threat. Prime example here from Clifford. So thanks for that call out. And Michael, before we run out of time, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give us a quick blurb about the recent talk you had around the.
Yep. So Anthony, the only thing I'd add to that question as well is choice, right? So there's so many factors in deciding where you store your data. Ultimately, that's the beauty of Veeam, is that you store it wherever you need to store it. I tend to see like the hardened repository. I would probably be putting 714 30-day retention on that, like that first landing zone, and then probably tearing that off. But then, like and that's for fast recovery. But then it comes down to like, where else do you want to go? But that's kind of choice has always been the Veeam. Veeam has always been the Switzerland to that, right? To your point, Matt, I just recently did a session where we're basically talking about that end to end when bad things happen to your data, and this is a session at Cloud Rejects, and I also did it last week, 2 weeks ago at State of OpenCon in London. And the premise of it was us attacking, and Matt and Anthony have said we probably should come back on and do the session specifically with Ootby as well. But the premise of it was, so we're talking about the software delivery, like the life cycle. You creating applications, and if you're not creating applications, you're buying them off the shelf. So you're putting a lot of trust into companies like Veeam to make sure that our software is secure and it doesn't have the I've lost my train of thought there. You're basically trusting the software vendor when you install that, and then you patch it, you update it. But if you don't update it, then is it secure anymore? So then, obviously, you're hopefully taking a backup. You're storing that backup into an immutable location. But what happens if the inevitable happens? Anthony, you touched on this up front. It's not a matter of if, but when. So that happens, and some guy in a hood with a random Mac gets on stage and starts attacking a system. Not only do they attack the database, the production database, but equally they fire up. They've gained access into your environment, and they get into your S3 location, and they're able to somehow send that script to say, I'm going to delete that bucket. I'm going to empty the bucket. Quite easy. In fact, if you've never done that to a non-immutable bucket in S3 or an S3 compatible bucket, it's very easy to do. Like, it is literally a command that says go and delete everything from it. And then ultimately, okay, then bad things have happened. The international running around, SOS. How do we get things back up and running as fast as possible? So then we head on over to our immutable backup repository. We hit refresh because the version is just a refresh version, and then we've got the ability to restore that. This is using Kasten. So we've got a couple of Kasten customers that are actually sending their backup data or in the process of sending their data to an object first box for that immutable copy version of that. It doesn't just need to be this VBR stuff and virtual machines and all of that good stuff. It's also the new cool tech or cloud tech stuff as well.
Well, thanks, Michael. And I do encourage everyone to go check that out. If not just for his cool hacker hoodie, you get to see that hack attack in action. But yes, and we will be bringing you back. That is already, we're going to plan it, put on the books, so we can see some of that demonstration on this show in real time, because I am excited to have it here. We're coming up on an hour, folks. It's been really great discussion. So we're going to do one last quick around the horn. One thing that you either thought bears repeating or that we didn't get to. We'll start with Matt.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right? I mean, this is kind of the theme of this show. We talk until we feel like we need to start wrapping up. So it's always a pleasure to have these legends on with us. I think for me, I've already said this multiple times on this show, but also on previous shows. Ransomware is just the hot button today. It's not like all the other threats have vanished. And, Michael, you talked about accidental deletions are still very prevalent. I mean, all these things are still out there. Ransomware has just got the mic at the moment, right? So I feel like having your data encrypted, landing it on immutable storage like S3 with object lock enabled, where you don't have to be the security expert, I think is critical, because I feel like the more levers you enable people to pull, the higher likelihood of a human error happening, right? And whether that's data getting deleted or putting your data at risk, just from a vulnerability standpoint, who knows, right? Because there's so many levers that are, able to be tweaked and pulled in configuration changes. So that's one of the things that simplicity really rings true to me. If it's hardened by default and simple, that really equals secure in my view of things. So that's really just what I want to end it with. How about you, Michael?
So, yeah, I think mine would be, if you're in charge of the data, like you have a responsibility of that data across all of the different platforms, go to them individually and ensure that you've got some level of not only protection, but that immutable flag button, whatever that needs to be, as that end-to-end. What happens when bad things happen to that data? And just picture what that looks like, because the amount of people in the cloud that I speak to, like I'm in Microsoft Azure, great. Microsoft are going to keep the lights on. They're going to keep them servers pumping. You're going to keep paying, but you make a mistake in that cloud infrastructure that you've built. You delete that database, you drop the table, and I'm sure pretty much everyone on this call has dropped a database for demo purposes, but equally mistakes were made. The being able to run through that and understand what that means and be able to recover that data. So every platform needs to be not only protected, but also in an immutable fashion.
Rick, what about you?
The only way to learn how to swim is by swimming. You can't read it in a book. And I think the same goes for your data resilience practice. And what I mean by that is I talk to a lot of organizations who might be a little bit too comfortable with cybersecurity threats. Maybe 8 years ago, they had a couple PCs get boogered up with a ransomware. Okay, well, we got out of it fine. Well, have you seen ransomware lately? Okay. And my thought here, my advice to organizations is it can be nasty. And what we do left of the bang 100% predicates what we do to the right of the bang. And if you look at any specialized thing, I'm going to be crisp, I promise. But I was walking through the airport and somebody was complaining that the security screening line was taking long. And they jokingly said, "What are you doing, training?" And they're like, "We train every day." And actually, I love that. Any specialization, law enforcement, pilots, security, special forces, they train often for the rare event. And that's why a lot of times those types of specialists can really be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And when you think about the risks at play today with some of these cybersecurity threats, the only way to learn how to swim is by swimming. Meaning, have we ever done an import of all we have is a bucket and it's on the UTB or it's in the cloud? Let's start from scratch in Greenfield. You know what? I guarantee you, any of you, even myself, if you go through that, you're going to learn something. You're going to say, it would be a really good idea if I put my bucket credentials in my password manager. It would be a really good idea if I put my encryption password in there too, not just my service account passwords. Things like that will be the things you describe. And so my thought is, if the numbers are telling us, the data tells us that a cybersecurity incident is the single most likely disaster that an organization is going to have to deal with. And then we should ask ourselves the questions: are we prepared to deal with the current risk? Yes, we're assuming breach, but have we done things to demonstrate that we can get out of this? And do it while the lead architect is on holiday in Alaska hiking, because the threat actors know their schedule. I'm not making this stuff up. This stuff happens. So that's my advice, is to really double down, talk to experts, talk to the Object First team, talk to the Veeam team, drills. These types of things are the difference maker to give everyone that outcome that they need today. Sorry, it went long.
Yep.
It's all good. It was good info, worth saying. So thank you, Rick. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Matt. And the last one I'll throw in. I always like a little CTA, something achievable you can do right now. If you're using object storage today, if it's in Amazon, if it's an UPI, if it's a build it yourself, whatever, go into your settings and check whether you're in compliance mode or governance mode. And if you're in governance mode, that means there's a governor. And if you are breached, they can disable your immutability. So little call to action for everyone. Just go check that. Make sure you are using compliance mode, especially when it comes to your backup data. Again, big shout outs and thanks to Rick and Michael. Thank you again for joining us today. Y'all brought the heat with your answers. We love having you, and we'd love to have you again. So thanks. And thanks as always to Matt for keeping the boards up, keeping the quotes up and the sound effects going. Thanks to our viewers for watching. And as per usual, you know where to find us every third Tuesday, monthly Zero Gravity Live. But until then, stay weightless, stay frictionless, stay zero gravity.